Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. I'm Bob Hassenfratz. I'm the head of the English department for My Many Crimes. And welcome to the 55th annual Wallace Stevens Poetry Program. This program began in 1964 with funding from the Hartford to honor the poet Wallace Stevens, a former Hartford employee. The program mission is to promote poetry at the University of Connecticut and in the Hartford area by offering 2 poetry readings each spring, one in the Storrs campus and the other in the city, by a poet of national or international reputation. And we're truly delighted to have with us today Joy Harjo, an esteemed poet who follows in the footsteps of earlier program guests, and it is an august list: Marianne Moore, Elizabeth Bishop, John Berryman, Seamus Heaney, Derek Walcott, James Merrill, June Jordan, and Adrian Rich, among others. There are many, many others. I'd like to thank the sponsors of tonight's program, especially the Hartford, which has been supporting the Wallace Stevens Poetry Program for over 50 years. I'd also like to recognize the support of the Hartford Friends and Enemies of Wallace Stevens. I guess you can choose which side you feel like you belong on. UConn's Creative Writing Program, the English Department Speakers Fund, American Studies, the Humanities Institute, and the Writers Fund for Children's Literature. Finally, I'd like to thank Counterproof Press, Professors Laurie Sloan and Edvin Yeager, for making the broadside of Joy Harjo's poem, which I believe is at the base of this podium. I can't see it, but I think it is down there. It's really lovely. So have a look before you go. We have several hard copies of the poems that Joy will be reading for any audience members who may need a visual aid. Also, the student winners who are here, welcome and congratulations to the student winners. They will be reading from their poems, which can be found in your programs. Now, I've been sweating this part of my kind of forgettable introduction, I guess. I'm the introducer of the introducers. So, however, the program committee has decided that I shall read, to start off the festivities, a Wallace Stevens poem, which has a couple of difficult words in it. It's Of Modern Poetry by Wallace Stevens. I've listened to a lot of YouTube videos of Wallace Stevens reading his poetry, and I felt it was a little slow and funereal, so I think I might speed it up just a little bit. And there were some jokes about me. I'm from Oklahoma, and Joy has a lot of Oklahoma connections. We were joking about me reading it in an Oklahoma accent. I wasn't going to do it, but I guess I'm going to do it now. So, all right. The poem of the mind is an act of finding that will suffice. It has not always had to find. The scene was set, it repeated what was in the script. Then the theater was changed to something else. Its past was a souvenir. It has to be living to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the men of the time and to meet the women of the time. It has to think about war, and it has to find what will suffice. It has to construct a new stage. It has to be on that stage and, like an insatiable actor, slowly and with meditation, speak words that in the delicatest ear of the mind, repeat exactly that which it wants to hear, and the sound of which an invisible audience listens, not to play, but to itself, expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one. The actor is a metaphysician in the dark, twanging an instrument, twanging a wiry string that gives sounds passing through the sudden rightnesses, wholly containing the mind, below which it cannot descend, beyond which it has no will to rise. It must be the finding of a satisfaction, and may be of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing, the poem of the act of the mind. So tonight we are also honoring award-winning student poets. And I'm going to turn the podium over now to Dr. Sean Frederick Forbes, the Director of Creative Writing, who will introduce the winners of UConn's Early College Experience Program Poetry Contest. So Sean.
A little sultriness for you. So before I announce the winners of the Early College Experience Wallace Stevens Poetry Contest, I would like to thank Professors Charles Mahoney, Glenn MacLeod, Yohei Igarashi, Ellen Littman, Darcy Denigan, and Pam Brown, who helped me through my frenzy of trying to get everything done on time. My Assistant Director of Creative Writing, Carrie Carnahan, who has been incredible throughout this entire experience. And of course, my creative writing program undergraduate intern, Bailey Shea. Also, many thanks to Claire Reynolds, Melanie Hepburn, and Lori Nelson for all of their support and guidance. Also, special thanks to Professors Lori Sloan and Edvin Yeager from the UConn Design Center, and the undergraduate design center students who produced this wonderful broadside: Rachel Sarney, Samantha Hawney, Olivia Crosby, Ashley Perry, Alec Marcus, and Isa Marsola for designing the broadside this evening. So the Early College Experience program at UConn began in 1951 and is currently offered in approximately 115 schools in Connecticut. It allows academically motivated high school students to take a range of first-year university courses in the high school setting. For the past 10 years, this is their 10th anniversary for this particular award. The Wallace Stevens Poetry Program has worked with the ECE to sponsor a poetry contest for ECE high school students. And we have those three winners here. They are in the front row, and they are holding hands together. This is incredible. The third place winner is Jared Warner. Would you please stand? Jared Werner is a junior at Rockville High School. He enjoys reading, writing, and playing guitar. He has won 3 Scholastic Gold Keys for his work and earned second place for fiction in the Edith Wharton Writing Competition in 2016. He hopes to attend the University of Connecticut, and I hope to have him in some of my classes. You can find Jared's poem in your program. The second place winner is Sierra Tabor. Sierra is a Rockville High School senior in the creative writing program under Mrs. Victoria Nordland, who is also in the audience tonight. She was 17 years old and has been writing for 5 years. She enjoys being involved in the drama program, which is affiliated with Rockville High School's creative writing program. Sierra has won 3 Golden Keys along with a National Silver Medal through Scholastic Art and Writing. You can also find Sierra's poem in your program. And the first place winner this year is Kimberly McGuire. And Kimberly will be reading her poem tonight. She is a senior at Rockville High School and a student in the creative writing program taught by Mrs. Victoria Nordland. She has been writing since she was 7 years old, but has become serious in her writing since her entrance into high school. Her work primarily tends to be poetry and short stories with metaphorical and emotional themes. Kimberly, would you please come up, please?
Thank you for this honor. It's really wonderful to be here tonight. My poem is entitled Scripture for the Little Ones. Inside the wood of the cherry branches laid the framework for children, scribbled frantically beneath dead skin. The instructions pushed 100 words not to say through its bark and into the air, where they promised not to tempt, but to tease them into doing exactly what they shouldn't. In the late autumn air, he could touch his own lips and feel soil beneath his feet, noticing blossoms of fruit grow wonderfully beneath the pink of his jacket, where the 100 words tore through the material. It was his pained cry at night that he did not utter such indecencies, and instead ran through their pastures only inside the safety of his head. He remembered her pointing to the top when they were kids, after the fruit opened their buds and spores filled the blades of grass. There, she beckoned, her voice soft and hushed beneath the unforgiving hum of wind that filled his rounded ears. There, she pointed again, this time to his name at the top of the list, carved into the bark of tree limbs besides hers, with a half-swallowed heart, encircling their feet, and the words that they should never really say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to Carrie Carnahan, the Assistant Director of Creative Writing.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about the Wallace Stevens UConn Writing Contest. The Wallace Stevens Poetry Program promotes poetry at UConn by holding an annual all-campus poetry contest for students. The contest awards 3 prizes of $1,000, $500, and $250. The winners receive a copy of the guest poet's book, have their poems printed in the university's award-winning art and literary journal, The Long River Review, and since 2014, a signed copy of a broadside featuring a poem by the guest poet. So now I'm going to introduce the winners of the Wallace Stevens Poetry Prize at UConn. And our 3rd place winner is Ricardo Alvalo. Well, yeah, Ricardo Alvalo, whose parents are here tonight, which is so wonderful. Ricardo Alvalo graduated from the University of Connecticut with a BA in English and a concentration in creative writing. He is a first-generation college graduate. His writing is inspired by his friends, family, and his hometown of Bridgeport, Connecticut. Ricardo, could you join me and read your poem?
Thank you, Carrie. Volume all right? My poem's entitled Dio Tomas. Bernice skin crackles. It covers coquito-colored cuticles. Swine is for me, not him. Don't eat where you shit, he suggests. Impossible on mi isla. He chooses to forget what Columbus stole from this rich port. The dominoes he mixed by hand, knowingly. Capicu. Columbus never left. The Santa Maria sits in my stomach. The coquis haven't stopped coquilling ever since. Abuelo played the cuatro. Everyone salsa. You yawned and took another business call. Thank you.
Our 2nd place winner is Matthew Shelton. Matthew Ryan Shelton is a poet and translator working toward his PhD in the English department at UConn. Excuse me. His dissertation work focuses on translation and translingual practices and their role in and as poesis, or poetic making. His poetry and translations have appeared variously in English and Irish Gaelic in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the U.S., as well as 6 new pieces translated into Greek by Athens-based poet Nikos Violaris. He lives in New Haven with his wife and daughter, who are also here. Matthew?
All right, can you hear me? Okay. I have too many people to thank here, but I did want to mention Sean and the Creative Writing Program, my students who are here tonight, and thank you for being here. I am so proud of you. You really are doing a great job, even though I don't tell it to you enough. You know? Both Ricardo and Aaron, and I'm so pleased to be sharing a stage with Aaron, who I met in Belfast so many years ago. And Joy Harjo, who I couldn't ask to share a stage with a more incredible poet, who I've longed to meet since my father first gave me your books, more years ago than I would like to admit. And I won't cry, I promise. But my wife and my daughter Nora, who both of whom this poem is about, because we went through the process of IVF, which is not fun or pleasant or anything close to that, and she's the result. So this is for both of you. Tonight, I am late getting home. I find you sitting cross-legged in the room, surrounded by syringes, cast-off plastic coverings, and little vials littering the floor in front of you. Your hands, methodical and slow, are moving like it's second nature. What has become a ritual unfolds like clockwork or the mathematical equation for inscrutable devotion, step by step. First, you uncap the vial of Menopur and jab the glass pipette of ganirelix in, inject and swirl the clear solution till the tablet is dissolved. You pressurize the barrel of a new syringe, pull back the plunger to the 100 mark, and then inject the air into the vial of gonal F, inverting it, pull back the plunger to the 100 mark again. Drawing out the needle, you give it a flick, dislodging any bubbles, and inject the gonal F into the vial of Menopur and ganirelix. Pause. And draw the mixed solution up into the needle. Pause. You pinch the belly flesh between your thumb and finger as you raise the bevel, poised. You hesitate. Your hand begins to shake, suspended at the point before the point of contact. There it stays. You do not speak. I do not speak. The hand with which you hold the needle shakes the way it does whenever you cut up an onion. But what this is now, pressed up against the pause between the act and what might be the act, between noetic and somatic movement, I don't know. A fearful absence at the tipping point of promise, an intoxicating faint in which no word takes root, no word springs shoot or blossom, silent, anesthetic, mute. Sorry. I cannot tell you what I mean. I mean that I am frightened by your hands, the way they move, that I am frightened by the way the bevel pulls as you remove it from your skin, that I don't tell you, and I cannot tell you why I can't. We will forget this silence as it is. We will forget the hesitation it attends. The bevel snags as it goes in. You wince. It is your sacrifice. The plunger sticks and you breathe sharply in as it gives way. That burns, you say. No crying now, I say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. Our first place winner is Erin Lynn. Erin Lynn is pursuing her PhD in poetry at the University of Connecticut, where she also teaches English. She holds an MFA in poetry from Columbia University and an MA in Irish writing from Queen's University, Belfast. And I think her dad is here making this a thoroughly family affair tonight for the Wallace Stevens Yukon Writing Prizes. Erin, where are you?
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Sean and Carrie for the wonderful work you do. Really excited to be here with the other readers, and especially with Joy Harjo. It's a real honor for you to come to our campus and read to us. Mount Charles Residence Hall. I once lived in a rented red brick house with 9 other students and Edwardian ghosts. That winter, night came mid-afternoon. I lit my room like a lamb shop, and by morning, wine glasses stood at attention, waiting to be held. We scattered like mice around each other's routines and experimented with building our skeletons bridge thin. My sheets were fever damp with dream heat. My rugs were cat scratched from my ritual stretching. So when the strange man from the tourism office began to follow me home from the grocery, it was a relief to feel observed. And later that year, when the helicopters began their nightly vigil above our street, we prayed our thanks for their attention. Thank you.
So now I'm going to turn the podium over to Professor Darcy Denigan, who will introduce Joy Harjo.
Joy Harjo. I can think of no better voice for a night of poetry celebrating Wallace Stevens' legacy. When Stevens wrote the poem in your program of modern poetry, it's unlikely he was imagining Joy Harjo. But that's okay, because his poem itself imagined her. It's almost as if his poem conjured Harjo's poems. Of modern poetry is, as Charles Altieri describes, an abstraction about abstraction. And let's take the etymological roots of abstract, drawn away. And as we do, we can see his poem is a call to draw away from the world of appearances, to concentrate one's energy and powers in the mind, in the act of composition, of making itself. And the poem, in which the audience becomes the actor, as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one, is also a call for imaginative sympathy. Enter Joy Harjo, whose poems, since her first book in 1975, have recognized what quantum physicists are only more recently coming around to, that everything is connected on an intimate level. Her poems acknowledge our world today of Walmarts, fried food, cell phones, all the things of this world that rip us away from the self, the soul, the spirit. We may use different words for it. I think of Stevens' phrase of mere being, but no matter the name of the place we are trying to get back to, Harjo's poems bring us closer to it. Her poems are often born from violence, despair, loss, but then they pursue something else, a new way to tell the story, a way to fold pieces of time together. She writes, "In the last days of the fourth world, I wish to make a map for those who would climb through the hole in the sky. My only tools were the desires of humans as they emerged from the killing fields, from the bedrooms and kitchens." How is she able to make this map to other worlds? Because, as she writes in her newest book, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, a book many of us here have spent this past winter reading, chanting, sharing with each other, writing through and off, I'm singing a song that can only be born after losing a country. Joy Harjo was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and is a member of the Muskogee Nation. In an interview early in her career, talking about the bitterness of the Native American experience, she quoted Gandhi, "I have learned, through bitter experience, the one supreme lesson, to conserve my anger, and as heat conserved is transmitted into energy, even so our anger, controlled, can be transmitted into power which can move the world." In this way, her poetry brings to mind the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, whose home was razed by the Israelis in 1948 and who spent his life not exactly writing poems of exile, but also poems of pursuit, of reclamation, much like Harjo, who writes a poem of the streets in Washington, D.C. These streets are old trails, curved to fit around trees. Or as one Darwish poem ends, "Whenever the road lengthens, the meaning renews, and I become two on this road, I and another." Which brings us back to the Stevens poem, words that in the air, in the delicatest air of the mind, repeat exactly that which it wants to hear, at the sound of which an invisible audience listens, not to the play, but to itself, expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions, becoming one. But just as I'm placing Harjo again and again in the tradition of our very best poets across nations, I want to say also that she is beyond compare, absolutely matchless. She is a poet who is also a saxophone player, songwriter, story writer, memoirist, playwright, and through her words and deeds, an incredibly galvanizing activist. Her memoir, Crazy Brave, won the PEN USA Literary Award for Creative NonFiction and the American Book Award. She has put out 5 CDs of music and tours internationally, solo and with her band, and in 2009 won the Native American Music Award for Best Female Artist of the Year. Some here in the audience tonight from UConn's fantastic children's literature program know her as a beloved children's and YA book author, and especially for her book, For a Girl Becoming, which won a Moonbeam Award and a silver medal from the Independent Publishers Award. But it's her poetry we're celebrating tonight, and in doing so, we join the many, many other organizations that have recognized her 8 collections. She has fellowships from the NEA, Guggenheim Foundation, Rasmussen United States Artists. The Poetry Society of America honored her with the Carlos Williams Award, and in 2015, the Academy of American Poets bestowed the Wallace Stevens Award on her for proven mastery in the art of poetry. Writing at the time of that award, Chancellor Alicia Ostraker said of Harjo's poems, "Aided by these redemptive forces of nature and spirit, incorporating native traditions of prayer and myth into a powerfully contemporary idiom, her visionary justice-seeking art transforms personal and collective bitterness to beauty, fragmentation to wholeness, and trauma to healing." She is a poet speaking to us from our time and for our time, but also breaking time and ripping it apart, threading histories and other lives and worlds together. Every word that's ever said tries to find a way to live, says Harjo. And she stops time too, as her words vibrate whole lives in our minds. Metaphysician of the dark, she brings us past the noise of our minds and into a mystery. This mystery, it is unspeakable, but it is able to be sung. Joy Harjo, we are so grateful for the music you make, and we're so grateful to be here with you right now.
What a wonderful evening so far. I should just sit down and let it continue happening. That was an excellent introduction, and then to hear all the poets. And this is really wonderful. It is a celebration, and that's really what it is about. We're poetry ancestors, and we have poetry ancestors. Wallace Stevens is a poetry ancestor. An American poetry ancestor world, Mahmoud Darwish is one of mine. That's how it works. When I teach a poetry ancestor class. All you need is one poet to start. And then you go from there. because they're all connected ultimately. In one class we went, and that's how we started, and at the end one of the students says, "I never read so much poetry," but they came in and everybody had their maps because everybody's connected, and at the end they saw how they were all related in their love of poetry. So in this poetry ancestor map, you would also, because you're right here in what's now called Storrs, Connecticut, there are also on that poetry ancestor map are the original peoples of these lands, the Pequot, Mohican, Pogisic, and others. And it's important to always recognize, because these people are people, because they take care of this place. And that is, they are also poetry ancestors. So I want to start with and play a song to recognize them, the original people, and also Wallace Stevens is a poetry ancestor, all of, and now these young people follow. That's how it goes. We pass it on generation by generation. I'm going to start with the Eagle poem as a way to also open the door. There are many doorways. Sunrise is a doorway. Can you hear me okay on here? Okay. Sunrise is a doorway. Every moment is a doorway. Every breath is a doorway. And there are ways to open the door. We open it for each other. Just like the poetry ancestors, they opened the door. And the eagle, in this poem, opened the door to understanding, to realizing in that moment that all life is ultimately sacred, even the most profane moments of it. To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know that there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know, except in moments steadily growing. And in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky and wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion. Like eagle, rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty, in beauty, Yakasaman. Hisagaramasi, Pomadi, Moe, Tuigas, Pokahoyan, Ye, Giadi, Mo, Nakalechka, Heathlin, Pokalajan, Biye Yathlis. I'm going to start with this little vignette from the beginning of Crazy Brave. Because I think what I learned, I remember a recording engineer telling me once, saying, with every project you learn something. You come into the studio, what is it that you want to learn with this album? Or what is it you want to learn with this book? Or what is it you want to learn with the paper you're working on or you're supposed to be working on? You know, there's always something. You need to keep that doorway up. There's always something you can learn. And I realized that when I wrote my memoir, Crazy Brave, I was learning about childhood, about the consciousness of childhood and how we children come into the world actually pretty much knowing everything, and then they forget. And you know that moment when you've held a newborn and their eyes are open and they see and know and they recognize you sometimes and they remember you, and then they sleep and sleep and sleep, and then they forget. Because to remember everything is too much. And then when you get older, then you start remembering everything again. And that's what happens. So there I was. This was before language. And so language is wonderful and it's creative. But there's that place before language when you still remember, that you're still closer to remembering who you are. And I remember, this is about a moment of driving around. I always loved travel. I always be the first one to get in the car. And this was before seatbelts. That's before seatbelts. It tells you. And but there was an opening. Like I said, there are doors, and there was an opening in the music. We often find those places in the music. And I was listening to the radio, and there was an opening, and I wound up, I guess Jung called it, is it cosmic consciousness? I wound up in one of those places, and I was like 3 or 4 years old. Once I was so small I could barely see over the top of the back seat of the black Cadillac my father bought with his Indian oil money. He polished and tuned his car daily. I wanted to see everything. This was around the time I acquired language, when something happened that changed my relationship to the spin of the world. It changed even the way I looked at the sun. This suspended integer of time probably escaped ordinary notice in my parents' universe, which informed most of my vision in the ordinary world. They were still omnipresent gods. We were driving somewhere in Tulsa, the northern border of the Creek Nation. I don't know where we were going or where we had been, but I know the sun was boiling the asphalt. The car windows were open for any breeze as I stood on tiptoes on the floorboard behind my father, a handsome god who smelled of Old Spice, whose slick black hair was always impeccably groomed, his clothes perfectly creased and ironed. The radio was on. Even then I loved the radio, jukeboxes, or any magic thing containing music. I wonder what signaled this moment, a loop of time that on the first glance could be any place in time. I became acutely aware of the line the jazz trumpeter was playing, a sound I later learned was Miles Davis. I didn't know the words jazz or trumpet. I don't know how to say it with what sounds or words, but in that confluence of hot southern afternoon and the breeze of aftershave and humidity, I followed that sound to the birth of sound. I was suspended in whirling stars. I grieved my parents' failings, my own life, which I saw stretched the length of that rhapsody. My rite of passage into the world of humanity occurred then through jazz. The music was a startling bridge between familiar and strange lands. I heard stomp dance shells singing. I saw suits, satin, fine hats. I heard workers singing in the fields. It was a way to speak beyond the confines of ordinary language. I still hear it. So I'm working on a play right now, a musical that will change the story of American music, blues and jazz, to include Southeastern Native people, because we were also part of the story. When you hear our traditional music, it's all there. Rabbit is up to tricks. I'm a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Our people were in Georgia, Tennessee, in Alabama, all down into Florida, and then the Muskogean people, all Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, all through there. But anyway, for our people, the trickster figure is Rabbit. And we still have rabbit stories, and rabbit stories are still being made because Rabbit is a fierce mirror, is a trickster figure, a fierce mirror for human behavior. And so this is a contemporary story, and you will know what I read. When I read it, you will see how we're in the middle of a terrible trickster tale that's taking place in the White House. You know how most cultures, if you study world cultures, that a lot of our cultures and a lot of our tribal cultures, we have clown figures. And they're important because certainly they give levity, and they're usually leaders have clown figures near them, because when someone gets a lot of power, they need to be brought back to reality. This doesn't all belong to you. It's not because of you. Any power that you have, I have, any of us have, belongs to the people. It's to share. Wallace Stevens' poetry power was to be shared, and Adrienne Rich's poetry power, and so on. That's how it is. So if you have a clown there making fun of you or saying, okay, it makes for a balance. Because you're suddenly reminded, okay, I'm a human being. I'm not a human god on here dispensing favors. In a world long before this one, I like hearing the baby. Yeah. In a world long before this one, there was enough for everyone until somebody got out of line. We heard it was Rabbit, fooling around with clay in the wind. Everybody was tired of his tricks and no one would play with him, and he was lonely in this world. So Rabbit thought to make a person. And when he blew into the mouth of that crude figure to see what would happen, the clay man stood up. Rabbit showed the clay man how to steal a chicken. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal corn. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal someone else's wife, and that clay man obeyed. Rabbit felt important and powerful, and clay man felt important and powerful, and once that clay man started, he could not stop. Once he took that chicken, he wanted all the chickens. Once he took that corn, he wanted all the corn. And once he took that wife, well, he wanted all the wives. He was insatiable. Then he had a taste of gold. He wanted all the gold. Soon it was land or anything else he saw. His wanting only made him want more. Soon it was countries. Then it was trade. The wanting infected the earth. We lost track of the purpose and meaning for life. We began to forget our songs, our stories. We could no longer see or hear our ancestors or talk with each other across the kitchen table. Forests were being mowed down all over the world to make more, and Rabbit had no place left to play. Rabbit's trick had backfired. Rabbit tried to call that clay man back, but when that clay man wouldn't listen, Rabbit realized he'd made a clay man with no ears. I'm going to read a new poem. Something that's always tricky to do, and I have my pen up here because I always tell students, or even when you're writing a paper or something, it's good to read it out loud. You'll catch everything. You know, even beginning poetry students, I have found that most students can hear what is not working. But there's different levels of it. The first level is hearing it in your mind and listening, and then reading it out loud. Then there's another level when you read it to someone else, because it opens up the hearing field in a way. And then reading it to an audience, then you really hear everything that doesn't work. Not that I'm using you to experiment with. But this one just got accepted for a major American publication, and it's not their usual subject matter. But I'm working on a historical memoir. And okay, you think, okay, memoir is about memory. How can you have historical memory? But we all have historical memory. This earth has historical memory. It's in our DNA. Sometimes we have dreams that are probably our ancestors' dreams, or even dreams of people who are here or who were in the house. You know, it's a very complex and yet kind of simple thing. So this is like going back in time, but I'm also going to go way back to different relatives of mine and just kind of move back. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do it yet. But this could wind up in it, or it might not wind up in it at all. And it's called Running, about a very difficult time, a moment in time. Running. It's closing time. Violence is my boyfriend with a cross to bear. Hoisted on by the church, he wears it everywhere. There are no female deities in the Trinity. I don't know how I'm going to get out of here, said the flying fish to the tree. Last call. We've had it with history. We who look for vision here, in the Indian and Poetry Bar, somewhere to the left of hell. Now I have to find my way, when there's a river to cross and no boat to get me there, where there appears to be no home at all. My father gone, chased by the stepfather's gun. My father gone, chased by the stepfather's gun. Get out of here. I found my father at the bar. His ghost, at least, some piece of him in this sorry place. The boyfriend's convincing to a crowd. Right now, he's the spell of attraction. What tales he tells in the fog of thin hope. I wander this sad world we've made with the enemy's words. The lights quiver, like they do when the power's dwindling to a dangling string. It's time to go home. We are herded like stoned cattle, like children for the bombing drill, out the door into the dark street of this old Indian town where there are no Indians anymore. I was afraid of the dark because then I could see everything. The truth with its eyes staring back at me, the mouth of the dark with its shiny moon teeth. No words, just a hiss and a snap. I could hear my heart hurting with my in-the-dark ears. I thought I could take it. Where was the party? It's been a century since we left home with the American soldiers at our backs. The party had long started up in the parking lot. He flew through the dark, broke my stride with a punch. I went down and came up. I thought I could take being a girl with her heart in her arms. I carried it for justice, for the rights of all Indians. We all had that cross to bear. Those old ones followed me, the quiet girl with the long dark hair, the daughter of a warrior who wouldn't give up. I wasn't ready yet to fling free the cross. I ran and ran through the 2 a.m. streets. It was my way of breaking free. I was anything but history. I was the wind. That's a little intense. But it's important that whatever you do, you challenge yourself to go somewhere that you haven't gone before. If you're writing something that you've done before or you're not being challenged by, then you're on the wrong track. And Nothing is free. This poem is called This Morning I Pray for My Enemies, and it's the one on the broadside. And I think it's really cool that the students in the design center put it together. So that looks good. This morning I pray for my enemies. And whom do I call my enemy? An enemy must be worthy of engagement. I turn in the direction of the sun and keep walking. It's the heart that asks the question, not my furious mind. The heart is the smaller cousin of the sun. It sees and knows everything. It hears the gnashing even as it hears the blessing. The door to the mind should only open from the heart. An enemy who gets in risks the danger of becoming a friend. Now, this poem is called In Mystic. This is another one that was hard to write. I worked on this poem for months. I think there was even a broadside that came out, and I totally revised it from the broadside. Not that I'm going to revise This Morning I Pray for My Enemies. I think that one is done. This one I worked on. It was very, I think it's hard to write. I have a difficulty writing discordant things. And I remember Mary de la Sueur. I don't know if anyone in here is familiar with Mary de la Sueur and her work. Amazing, amazing poet and writer, and she was blacklisted during the McCarthy era. And just very powerful. And I met her when I first started writing, just like you guys, I first started writing, and she became a kind of mentor. But I remember she called me and she was delighted. She says, "I'm dying." And of course I was like panicking, like, what? And but she said, "I'm here at this point," and she was watching it all for 3 or 4 years and making notes about the whole process, and she was delighted because it was another adventure. And she was observing and being in the middle, exactly in the middle of where she was. So she called me up and she told me once, she said, she wrote this beautiful novel called The Girl. Has anyone in here read that? What's the name of that famous director? He optioned it at one point for a movie, and I was going to write it. But it's a wonderful story about bread lines and about a girl, the story of a girl trying to make it. And she said, "I think I wrote everything too beautiful." She was thinking about if she was wondering if she had regrets in this life. And I've thought about that. I wonder if it's possible to write what is too beautiful. And I know in my memoir I had a hard time with that, with those moments. How do I write? I want to write the truth as I see it, but I also I guess I'm always looking for a doorway, either for escape or to find another way, an opening to an understanding that I don't quite have together. There's some understandings that we'll only get if all of us are there. And sometimes there are people who are ahead of us who get there and hold it open for us. And often these people are the poets, the artists. And people don't always understand them. So in Mystic, that town is so beautiful. And I was walking around with my friend Jennifer over here, and she's my friend in here. And there's a lot of history. I mean, if you think about the U.S. in a few centuries ago, not many centuries ago, probably about 11 generations, 8 generations, 9, 10, about 10 generations, 11 generations. If you think of time that way, it's very interesting, because then you're still in your living room or your house if you start thinking of generations. This country was, I'm not going to say 100% indigenous, because people are always visiting from China. The Vikings came here and hung out for a while and probably intermarried and then took off, and some people were tired of being here or got in a fight with their dad and went over to live with the Vikings. We're human. We're human beings. That's how those stories work. We're all human beings. A lot of people don't think of natives that way. We're either dead, and sometimes people think we're all gone, or that we're supposed to look like somebody out of the Wild West show, just like, we don't expect some of you people to wear Puritan clothes or whatever, but, people expect us to do that. But anyway, there are stories here. So, you think about it, can you imagine Africa with 0.5% African, indigenous African people? So that's what we're dealing with here in the story. But that's the story. That's part of our story. That's how we look at Parkland and all this gun violence and think, and this violence, this has been going on this is how this place was founded. And yet at the same time, it was founded, there was this idea of democracy that came from Iroquoian people and Muskogean people. There's a grand experiment on how people can remember. We have to remember. It's about remembering and listening to who we are, and that ultimately we are all related. That's what our teachings tell us. If you go to the root teachings of any of us, is ultimately you respect each other and we're all related. But these stories are pretty rugged here. If we were to listen to these stories and understand them, and that might lead toward a healing of this country. But in Mystic, there was a huge, terrible story there, and so sometimes I didn't want to write this poem. I think that's why I took 2 or 3, 4 years working on it, because it was intense. It's intense to be in those vortexes, like it's intense to be here. It's intense to stand in the wound of America right now. We're all, we're in the wound of America. But what's interesting, what's coming out are the young people with their voices, women. And that's because the body, which is the body of America, what does the body do? The body is a natural healer. So what happens when the body wants to heal itself? It sends healing. So the women, in order for this country to we have to realize that women are human beings too. And we stand next to you. We don't yet. So there's the Me Too. There's this urge for the body to heal itself. That's with the violence too. We've got to heal. How do we heal from this violence? The children, the children are standing up. But these are all urges to heal, for all of us to heal. In Mystic. My path is a cross of burning trees, lit by crows carrying fire in their beaks. I ask the guardians of these lands for permission to enter. I am a visitor to this history. No one remembers to ask anymore, they answer. What do I expect in this New England seaport town near the birthplace of democracy, where I am a ghost? Even a casino can't make an Indian real, or should I say native or savage or demon, and with what trade language? I am trading a backwards look for jeopardy. I agree with the ancient European maps. There are monsters beyond imagination that troll the waters. The Puritans' determined ships did fall off the edge of the world. I am happy to smell the sea, walk the narrow winding streets of shops and restaurants, and delight in the company of friends, trees, and small winds. I would rather not speak with history, but history came to me. It was dark before daybreak when the fire sparked. The men left on a hunt from the Pequot village, here, right here where I stand. The women and children left behind were set afire. I do not want to know this, but my gut knows the language of bloodshed. Over 600 were killed to establish a home for God's people, quoted the Puritan leaders in their Sunday sermons. And then history was gone in a betrayal of smoke. There is still burning, though we live in a democracy erected over the burial ground. This was given to me to speak. Every poem is an effort at ceremony. I asked for a way in. going to read a couple of pieces from Crazy Brave. And one of them, this book took me 14 years to write. Most of those years I wasn't writing it. That's not why it took me so long. I kept doing different versions, mainly because I was running away from the book it wanted to be. I wanted to start the book at the end when I learned to write. I start, coming into my own rather than all the other stuff that I didn't want anybody to know about. But you learn that it's in those challenging places where you learn the most. Because I think humans were in the design of humans, we were constructed with very hard heads. Anyway, at one point, I wind up a pregnant teenager after I had been in one of the first all-native drama and dance troupes at Indian School in Santa Fe and art school, and we got to travel. I got to travel the first time way up in Seattle, and we performed under the Space Needle in a theater, and I had a lead in one of the plays, and we were doing really well. Some people were going off to college, and I wound up pregnant and back in the Cherokee capital, Tahlequah, living on nothing. Really living on nothing. And, but, our dreams follow us. And because they're given to us to take care of. They're not just ours. They've been given to us from different, they've been given to us to share. And if you don't do that, you know people, some people get very haunted, or they become addicted because they're not taking care of what they were given to do. One night, as I raced down the sidewalk at Indian School, okay, that's not the one, I'm sorry. That was right before this part. When I lived in Tahlequah, I used to walk through town, up and down hills, along the creek by storefronts filled with items I had no money to buy. I walked when I was hugely pregnant and then after my son was born. It was my time alone. As I walked, I could hear my abandoned dreams making a racket in my soul. They urged me out the door or up in the night so they could speak to me. They wanted form, line, and story and melody and did not understand why I had made this unnecessary detour. Think for yourself, girl. Your people didn't walk all that way just so you could lay down their dreams. I wanted more, and I didn't know how I was going to get it. My days were consumed with the drudgery of survival. I took care of the household, made meals of beans, fried potatoes, and cheap meat. I negotiated with a husband who was essentially a boy. He didn't know how to grow up. His father had abandoned the family, and he had no father map. There were flashes of inspiration and joy. I saw my son sitting by the screen door making dirt parachutes, his fine baby hair lit by the sun, singing with a radio, and my stepdaughter in a striped jumper with balloons in honor of her 4th birthday climbing up swings in a park. But this wasn't enough to sustain the need for artistic expression. I believe that if you do not answer the noise and urgency of your gifts, they will turn on you or drag you down with their immense sadness at being abandoned. Okay, this one, I wound up in Tennessee for a few years, and I'll read these two here. And when I went to my interview at the university for this chair of excellence, they asked me, I was talking with them. I said, well, I do have connections up here in Knoxville. My grandfather, Manahui, he was one of the leaders of the Red Sticks who stood against Andrew Jackson, and the largest Native uprising in this country was at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Alabama. And he was one of the leaders of that. of standing against an injustice, and it was illegal. The removal and of people out of their homelands was an illegal act. He went against law to move us. And I said, well, my grandfather got his warrior name from stealing horses up here in Knoxville, which is true. And one reason I went is because I wanted to check it out, and it was closer into the South, into all these places that my family, we have stories about a lot of these places and so on. But one thing, when I write a poem, if I think I know where I'm going, it doesn't work. And so what was exciting about this poem, well, I wrote this poem, it's called How to Write a Poem in a Time of War. And I was watching all this coming down in Syria, and I remember seeing the image of those twin baby girls and feeling just what people go through in the world, the refugees and people being moved, and all the slave trade that's still going on in the world, and it gets overwhelming sometimes. And then I was sitting there that first night that my husband and I, and he's my same tribe, first night we were there in Knoxville. A lot of our ancestors just came crowding into the room because we had come back. Because years ago, when the little children left and people left, they thought they didn't know when they would ever come back. Sometimes it takes generations to come back. So that's where I wound up in this poem, but I didn't know how I would. And so there's kind of two voices. There's the writer voice that, the one that tells you, what do you think you're doing? You can't write a poem. You can't write. Where are you going to start? Where are you going to go? And the first line is, you can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. And I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to do a historical memoir, then I have to be here. And how am I going to be here? Because it's like seeing the babies and the pieces and the heartbreak. And you can't begin anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back, cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedrooms, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill. They take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight, like a train blown free of its destination, like a seed fallen where there is no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here, where deer peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun, redbirds, and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. We had started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter. Ah, those smoky, sweet sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen, though they began building their houses all around us and demanding more. They started teaching our children their God's story, a story in which we'd always be slaves. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold by words, even poetry. These memories were left here with the trees. The torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to the foot, a young man's promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep. Despite the distant bombs, terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, none of us will make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandson, his granddaughter. Hey, hey, oh, 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 as he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children. There, it would be hidden from the soldiers. who would take them miles, rivers, mountains from the navel cord place of the origin story. He knew one day, far day, the grandchildren would return generations later over slick highways constructed over old trails, through walls of laws meant to hamper or destroy, over the libraries of the winds. His song brought us to our home place in these smoky hills. Begin here. So this is the season. I think it was Carrie was saying she's talking about what a winter you guys have had here. And that she knew that spring was coming because she could hear the songs of the mating songs of the frogs. She'd heard the first one. And so at our place in Knoxville, the condo is up on a hill where Manahu used to come up there and look out over the city to check out the horses. And so the condo's up there. For a while, too, it was a Civil War camp. See, I do a lot of research for my poems, too. People think, people just think of poems and here they come. But often there's research and you rewrite and work on stuff. But anyway, I've been watching the birds. And right around this time, they get, just like humans, they get really fierce in their mating rituals. And one time we were trying to get down the hill, and there were these two male turkeys blocking the road because they were duking it out over a female who was standing over there batting her eyelashes and then egging them on, so to speak. Anyway, this is about a redbird. This was watching this redbird, and I guess we've seen a couple of generations now, these redbirds. And we watched this beautiful young female coming up, and we had seen her as a baby and watched her grow up, and then we watch her and her mating ritual with this young male. This is called Redbird Love. We watched her grow up. She was the urgent chirper, fledgling flyer, and when spring rolled out its green, she'd grown into the most noticeable bird girl. Long-legged and just the right amount of blush tipping her wings, crest, and tail, and she knew it in the bird parade. We watched her strut. She owned her stuff. The males perked their armor, greased their wings, and flew skyloop missions to show off for her. In the end, there is only one. There's that one you circle back to for home. This morning, the young couple scavenged seeds on the patio. She is thickening with eggs. Their minds are busy with sticks the perfect size, tufts of fluff like dandelion and other pieces of soft. He steps aside for her so she can eat. Then we watch him fill his beak, walk tenderly to her and kiss her with seed. The sacred world lifts up its head to notice. We are double, triple blessed. I think I'm going to end with a couple of poems here. And this one is called Equinox. And this one I wrote this poem, we just passed equinox, spring equinox, which is a time of balancing and a shift, a doorway, if you will. And I wrote this, I was standing at sunset somewhere in Michigan waiting to be picked up to perform. And I was thinking about this ceremony we're all in together, how at sunrise is the sun comes up and it hits the earth. This is all scientific too. It hits the earth and at an angle, and it sets out this light. And it's good to be there to catch that light, to catch that. And so it's a good way, it's a good place to be. I noticed that all the people who seem to know things are up at dawn. Either they stay up all night, and there they are, or they get up and catch that light. Because there's, of course, illumination, but illumination happens on many kinds of levels. And it's a good time to get up and say thank you. I'm glad I'm here. Help us, help my brother. He's going through this. And thank you for these red birds. You know, thank you for the poets. Thank you for all the people who put this together. It's a lot of people. It takes a lot to put something on like this. And it goes on for a year, even sometimes 2 years, to put all of this together. You know, people had to put that food together, and people picking me up at the airport, and, you know, it just takes a lot. So then sunset, I was standing there at sunset. It's a good time to let things go. We're a lot lighter in our minds and our hearts and our bodies. We can stand there and say, okay, what do I need to let go through the day? Man, I shouldn't have said that. You know, or I can't believe so-and-so, let it go. You know why, you know how the things from a long time ago start haunting us. Let it go. Just give it over, let it go. And this was about letting go. I must keep from breaking into the story by force. If I do, I will find a work club in my hand, and the smoke of grief staggering toward the sun, your nation dead beside you. I keep walking away, though it has been an eternity, and from each drop of blood springs up sons and daughters and trees, a mountain of sorrows, of songs. I tell you this from the dusk of a small city in the north, not far from the birthplace of cars and industry. Geese are returning to mate, and crocuses have broken through the frozen earth. Soon they will come for me, and I will make my stand before the jury of destiny. Yes, I will answer in the clatter of the new world. I have broken my addiction to war and desire. Yes, I will reply. I have buried the dead and made songs of the blood, the marrow. And finally, perhaps the world ends here. A lot of what I learned at the Kitchen Table University. You can learn everything there. You can gauge the current economic situation by the kitchen table, or what food is there. You can teach sociology, theology, economics, just about anything by, who's sitting at the kitchen table. Maybe it's just the kids there opening up a box of Barbie cereal. Or maybe the whole family's there. And maybe they, have a little garden plot out back, and people are, somebody's cooked breakfast, or, the whole story is there. War, that's where war begins. It's people at their talking kitchen table. They're talking hate, talking love. So anyway, thank you, Mado, as we say, for this opportunity to stand here in these lands, these beautiful lands that give us so much and ask for so little from humans. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies, and the ghost of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. We do have books available for sale, and I think Joy Harjo would autograph them. Thank you again, and good evening.